Hello, welcome to the Holy War channel, where we discuss all things related to jihad and crusade. Today, I have a special episode for you, something I think is very interesting, something that speaks near and dear to me about the things that I do, and perhaps what you also like if you read my books or watch my videos. And it has to do with the story of John Hunyadi, who's actually, I have an entire chapter about him in this book, Defenders of the West, chapter 6. The hero of Hungary who withstood the Ottoman jihad in the 15th century. Now, why this is all interesting and why it all converges today and now for me is I'm actually in Hungary at this moment as we speak in Budapest. And also, the reason I actually noticed this Netflix series, which I'm going to be getting into, is right now at this date itself. And if you know, I often write articles about today in history that deal with major battles and campaigns. Right about now, there's one of the most important campaigns that John Hunyadi essentially led, and we'll get into that. But ultimately, this is about a Netflix series, which you may or may not have heard of, called Rise of the Raven, I think, which is dedicated to John Hunyadi, which is great. And it's actually in Hungarian. I think it was made by Hungarian producers, directors, actors. And it's in Hungarian and other languages, Balkan languages. I think they have Turkish in there, but it's got English subtitles. So we're going to talk about all that, how it all converges, and what can be learned from it, both the actual series, the actual history, and why they contradict. I think that's the most important point, which we're going to get into. And in fact, also what made the series even more important, or just as important, is it's not just about John Hunyadi. It also has Vlad the Impaler, who's another character in my book, Defenders of the West. He has his own chapter, chapter 8. So it really, this series homes in on the stuff that I know, that I study, that I write about, that I make videos about. So I know a thing or two and have much to opine that you may find edifying in regards to the series, the actual history, and like I said, the date that we're dealing with right now, a very important date, which I'll get into. Okay, so in general, and spoiler alert, if you do want to watch this and you don't want to have it spoiled for you, I'm going to be talking about things, obviously, so you've been forewarned. I'm going to be talking about the history, the correct history, and a lot of scenes in this series. Like I said, I saw it on Netflix, but I think it's made by some Hungarian company. And so overall, my verdict, just so you know, is it was actually pretty good. It's decent. Okay. It was good. It was decent in the sense that by saying that is less reflective of it being good and more reflective of the fact that most movies, series, and all that are garbage. So it's not great praise that I'm giving it. In other words, it probably scores like a 5 or a 6 in my book out of 10. But considering that most things score about 1 or 2 in my book, that's pretty good. All right. And I think its saving grace is that maybe because it is made by a Hungarian company, producer, director, actor. So there is some saving grace to it as opposed to full blown Hollywood nonsense, propaganda, and whatnot. And we're going to be addressing a lot of important themes that, in a way, I'm using this series to actually, as a sort of paradigm, to talk about how movies in general deal with Christian history, especially vis-a-vis Islam, and particularly in the medieval era. Okay, because what I'm going to be talking about comes up all the time in other movies and other series. Let me see. Are you guys there? Oh, okay. You're all chatting. You're all there. You all can hear me. Usually I check that you can hear me, but okay, good. The screen was large. I didn't see. All right. I see what you're saying. He is Coptic. Yes, he is. Afternoon, Raymond. Afternoon. Glad you're all joining me. All right. This is going to be fun. Now, let's get into it. So like I said, as a series, it was okay. But again, that's not high praise considering that I think most things on TV are utter trash. All right. But so before proceeding, and the reason I say all this, and the number one pet peeve I have, which I'm going to get into, is the anachronisms. Okay, the anachronism means essentially when modern Western people project their ideals, their epistemology, their everything onto pre-modern, medieval, or even ancient people. Okay, and that's always happening in TV, and that just really rankles for me. So we're going to get into all that, but before we do, let me give you a bare bone summary of John Hunyadi and his significance, why he matters, why we're talking about it, why he's in my book, and why this Netflix series even you talked about him. So John Hunyadi basically was born around 1406 or 7, and he was born right around in Transylvania. Now, look, so he's a Hungarian hero, but as far as his bloodline, that's some people will argue he's Wallachian or Romanian. Some will say no, he's Hungarian. He was born in an area that would today be considered Romanian, and a lot of Romanians insist he's of Romanian descent. Having said that, Hungary at that time was a very kind of almost a multi-ethnic kingdom, and by all intents and purposes, he was Hungarian. He spoke Hungarian. He served under Hungarian kings. He married a Hungarian. He had, his son became the king of Hungary. So he's very much claimed by Hungary. And I definitely don't want to get into this little kind of argument that Romanians and Hungarians have about it, but I'm just letting you know, just so you know. So as I said, in his early career, so he was born around 1406, and he started rising to prominence very early on with his fight against the Ottomans, the Muslim Turks, who at the time were essentially the growing scourge of Europe, primarily the Balkans regions where he's hailed from. And he fought under the Serbian despot Brankovic, and then later he fought under the Hungarian king, who became for a time Holy Roman Emperor King Sigismund, who also lost the famous battle at Nicopolis because of the French, he claimed. Anyway, he started fighting and rose to prominence. So by the 1430s and 40s, he earned a lot of land and actually became a powerful magnate. Then he became the voivode, or essentially warlord, of Transylvania. Then he later became the captain of Belgrade. And he started defeating the Ottomans at a time when no one was defeating them, including one of his earliest victories was in 1442. And then he led what is called the Long Campaign in the winter of 1443 and into early 1444, where he actually penetrated into Ottoman territory, which was completely unheard of. Up until then, what the Christians and the Europeans did against the Ottomans was at best defend. Okay, so you hope the Ottomans don't come, and if and when they do, well, you at best you hunker down and defend. At worst, you capitulate, as many actually did, and become a vassal state of the Ottomans. Hunyadi, would have made him rather remarkable. He wasn't content with that. He would actually go on the offensive. And that kind of, raised a few eyebrows, especially when he started becoming, which early on, he started becoming actually victorious against the Ottomans. So this was unheard of. And that's the Long Campaign, which I just mentioned in the winter of 1443. That's the one that I mentioned. The date is important right now because we are in winter. And it was at this moment in time when it was actually reaching its climax. And I'll get into that. So this is the Long Campaign. Then after that, there was the Battle of Varna. We're going to get into that. And then he became the governor or the regent of Hungary because the king at that time was a very young boy. And, he was also an adroit statesman. So that's interesting. And then, his greatest triumph was the defense of Belgrade in 1456 against the Sultan Muhammad II, or Mehmet, as people like to call him. And this was at a time, this is 3 years after the sack of Constantinople under the same Ottoman Sultan, Muhammad, when Europe was in complete terror. And if Belgrade had fallen, that would have been the end, essentially, for all of Europe, because that was a key strategic fortress that really was seen as the doorway into Europe. And that's exactly why Muhammad II wanted it. Anyway, then he dies. He actually died a few weeks after defending Belgrade in 1456. And his legacy and his significance and why he matters is he's actually eventually the Ottomans did conquer the Hungary, but that was 70 years after what Hunyadi did, the defense of Belgrade. That attack on Belgrade was supposed to be a conquest. Muhammad himself, the second, came. I describe it at a great length in my book that I just showed you, Defenders of the West. That's the pivotal point in the chapter of John Hunyadi's life and career against the Ottomans. And had they won, which is, and they threw everything they could at them, that would have been the initial conquest of Hungary. But as it is, it actually came much, much later in 1526 at the Battle of Mohawks. So basically, he bought Hungary 7 decades of freedom from the Islamic yoke. As such, he was then and now celebrated as a defender of Christendom, and that was his title in Latin. And in fact, the noon bell ringing is because of him. Anytime, if you're familiar with churches ringing the bell at noon bell ringing all around the world, that was inspired and actually instituted by the Pope Calixtus III, to celebrate the defense of Belgrade against the Ottoman Turks. That's how pivotal and important and inspiring that defense was. Okay. And finally, his son, even though Hunyadi himself, was born essentially as a lesser noble, his own son, because of the great feats of John Hunyadi, rose to become the king of Hungary. And this would be King Matthias or Matthew Corvinus. And he's considered one of Hungary's greatest kings, actually. All right, so that in a nutshell is John Hunyadi, and I'm just basically trying to introduce him to you so you have an idea of what we're talking about, this series, if you haven't watched it. And if you did watch it, a lot of this may even seem weird to you because they don't get into a lot of this stuff. Okay, so let's get into it. What's my problem with this series? What's the bone I have to pick? Many. Let's begin with the character of Hunyadi, John Hunyadi. All right. In the series, if you watch it, well, he's basically he's like a Fabio guy. He's a stud. He's got long hair. He's got a beard, very masculine, almost borderline toxic masculinity. He's ripped. He's fit, but he's kind of not very intelligent. Essentially, they're trying to portray him as all brain and no brawn, which flies against the evidence of who he was. I'm sure he was a lot of brawn, but he definitely had a lot of brain as well. Okay, because he was an excellent strategist, and he became the governor of Hungary, regent of governor for a long time because of his political adroitness. But that doesn't come out at all. He's just kind of like a brute, a womanizer. We'll get into that. He appears getting drunk at parties and consorting with whores, literally whores. And honestly, there's nothing when you watch this. So if you read the primary sources that I did, or if you read the chapter that I wrote about him, which is based on the primary sources, you're left with kind of a noble figure in your mind of who John Hunyadi was. Here, he's kind of like a modern kind of dude, partying, having fun. Yeah, he's a patriot and he wants to defend his homeland and he's ready to get in a fight and he's very brave and he's rash. But he's kind of he's flat. He's two-dimensional. There's no depth to him. There's nothing really interesting or inspiring about him. Okay, so that's the first thing that I noticed about him, which I didn't expect. Now, he was known historically as the White Knight of Wallachia, because that's where he's from. Wallachia is modern-day Romania. But in this series, they decided to have him dressed in a gold armor. Now, the problem with that is it continues and furthers the idea, which I'll get into because it's part of the whole series, that he's sort of worldly and he's into gold and, he's decadent. Actually, he was called the White Knight. Okay, he wore regular armor, which would have looked whitish or basically metallic, silver. But he was called the White Knight primarily because he wore a white tunic or a surcoat over the armor, which made him very distinctive and kind of reminds me of the Templars That's what they did. The Knights of the Temple. They wore a white tunic because that represented their purity and their religious piety, and the red cross, of course, was their willingness to be martyred for their faith. Anyway, the fact that they even put him in a gold, armor again, these are the little subtle things that are sort of distasteful to me because it gives the wrong message. He was known as the White Knight, but they try to emphasize that he's the Golden Knight. And again, when you put him in gold, that just again, it's almost an indication of worldly decadence, and that's really the problem because that's what they're going with, as I will elaborate. That's kind of the idea that they're trying to present of who John Hunyadi and his contemporaries are. But as you'll see, the sources say something rather different. Okay. Then the worst part is, have you seen Game of Thrones? Okay, it has that sort of level of sexuality, right? Everyone there is engaged in scandal, sexual scandal, adultery, you name it. Okay, they're just like modern people, and that's the whole point. They want you to think that, including Hunyadi. So Hunyadi, as I sort of indicated earlier, appears getting drunk and hanging out in taverns, and he has a long affair with some Italian woman, and he even at one point boasts about, yeah, I've told 100 women I love them. All right. Here's the issue. None of that's recorded. Okay. If you look at the sources, as I have, there's nothing about that. He was married to one woman, Elizabeth. He had the 2 sons with her, and that's all we know. So I don't know why. And when I say the word Hollywood, again, I'm using the generic idea of of movie makers. So I don't know why Hollywood always has to do that. Now, this is a noble man. I don't mean it necessarily as aristocracy. Noble as in honorable and inspiring. But they made him not so. They made him sort of sexually depraved. They made everyone in that era sexually depraved. Okay. And that's the first thing that really got to me. Kind of like it got to me and it didn't get to me. It didn't get to me because, well, that's what every single movie is, right? Every single movie. And I don't mind it when they do that in the modern era because, well, everyone is sexually depraved today. But when you project that, and that's what I was saying, onto the past, yeah, that kind of rankles a little bit with me because I know better, because I'm familiar with the past. I'm only here because of a time travel machine. No, I'm kidding. I'm familiar with the past because I've really spent a lot of time reading about the past. And that stuff, it did happen. There was adultery, there were affairs. I'm not arguing that. But the point is, if you just go by the sources, that stuff is not that common. It happened, at least the recording of it. But when you watch a Hollywood movie or any of these movies that talk about it, it's like everyone always is engaged in that sort of behavior. Everyone. The women are all cynical, depraved hussies. The men, all they want to do is get laid, etc., etc. And again, I don't mind if that's what you do for the modern era, but when you do that and you project it on this period of time, all right, I do have a problem with that because it's just so obviously wrong. It's so counter to what the source is. And without the sources, we know nothing, right? You want to talk about history, that means what do the primary sources says? That's the only thing we know, okay? And the primary sources do not display what this series and what all series that deal with early medieval Christian Europe portray, which is everyone is just, especially the nobles, they're all, like I said, I'll get into it. I don't want to go off on a tangent because this is actually its own topic, and I should probably do an actual video or a live stream about it. And but suffice to say, before I move on, just because I want to, is that the thing which I've already indicated, it's not in the sources. So how do they know? Why must this sort of behavior, the adultery, the scandal, the perversion, including for the hero himself, why must it be there? Is it because sex sells? Well, that's what I thought. That's what everyone says, right? Sex sells. But I'm starting to wonder, or is this sort of a concerted effort to basically degrade us? Think about it. Every single movie, series, or whatever that deals with the pre-modern, especially medieval era or ancient era, eras that did not necessarily, I mean, there were times, of course, that were pretty depraved, Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm not arguing that, but there's a lot of other times that were not in any way, shape, or form like that. But they always do that. They always want you to think that everyone was like that. Is that because they're trying to groom us, socially engineer us into thinking that's the way to be, that's the way to live, that's the only thing you can ever do, that's normal, just for everyone to commit adultery, for everyone to fornicate, for everyone to engage in unnatural sexual practices? Is it basically a way for them to convince us of their agenda, of how they want us to be? I think so, actually. I've lived long enough and I've seen enough movies to realize this is an unwavering principle anytime you watch these kind of movies, all right, which deal with a time that was not like this. And I think it's because they want to convince you, hey, this is human nature. Everyone's been like that. Don't fight it. Give in. Why are you bothering? And the problem is, we're talking about a time that was immensely pious, immensely, wedded to the idea of marriage and fidelity, for example, immensely against what is considered today as a normal sexuality. So why do they do that? Why do they project themselves and their mores onto these early societies that completely rejected this lifestyle? And I'm starting to think it's not because they just sex sells and they want to show you what you want to see. I mean, I find a lot of this stuff cringe to watch, even when I'm all alone, because why? Okay, so sex doesn't sell to me in that sense. Um, I think it's actually a whole project, and it's been going on for a long time to desensitize, to actually manipulate you into thinking that depraved sexuality, adultery, whatever, is just absolutely normal. Everyone's been doing it, even the great Hunyadi. So who are you to um, resist? Anyway, I told you about me and tangents. So I patiently endured. So it's about 10 episodes, the series. And I made myself watch. I kind of blitzed through it. Only I've known about this. I think it came out in 2025, and I've known about it for a few months because people told me, "What do you think about it?" I never watched it, but like I said, because I'm in Hungary, and I was thinking about the battle, the long campaign, which I just mentioned to you, and then I thought, "Hey, let's watch it." And basically, I had to force myself to finish it quickly, is what I mean, because I started a week ago, and it would have taken me several weeks to go through it had I gone on my own time schedule. Excuse me, but I wanted to see the whole thing before I started talking about it. Now, the worst part is it's 10 episodes, and I went through the way I'm describing it. The first 5 or 6, that's what they're all about. Okay, it's all about the scandals, sex scandals, Hunyadi's affair, his wife upset, this person being impregnated with this bastard, and that sort of thing going on constantly. And I'm thinking, okay, be patient because the long campaign is coming up. And the long campaign, as I mentioned, was this is arguably one of the most, it's maybe second to the defense of Belgrade, which we'll get into in 1456, but this is before it, about 10 years earlier, where Hunyadi, like I said, led a counter-offensive against the Ottomans in the middle of winter, which was unheard of. And I have a whole section about it in my book because it's that important. And guess what? That got no mention in this series. So I had to watch this John Hunyadi series and watch all these fictitious, imaginary, never happened sexual scandals and affairs going on. And I'm thinking, okay, well, at least we have this awesome section in history that we know about, the long campaign. And surely they're going to give that some coverage. Zero. All right. You know what? Maybe it's actually in my book right here, the one I told you. It's a page and a half. Maybe at the end I'll read it to you because, like I said, this is its time right now. It was culminating right around this date. What are we? January 30. So yeah, we'll get into it and talk about it. Now, going hand in hand with this business about the sort of sensational, scandalous sexuality, the Game of Thrones version that permeated this series as well. What goes hand in hand with it when you're watching a movie or a series that's dealing with medieval Christianity or that that era? Well, of course, belittling Christianity itself and misrepresenting it and making it look as bad as possible, especially vis-a-vis, or that is in comparison to, the Muslims, which in this case we have plenty of. So this particular series furnished a lot of that sort of contrasting, where Christians are stupid, hypocrites, and evil, Muslims are magnanimous, etc., etc. And that if you've seen movies, you've seen, for the most famous one that people mention is Kingdom of Heaven, of course, the Crusade movie, Saladin, and so forth. And what I just described happens there, of course, but it happens here too, which was a little shocking and disappointing, seeing that this is a Hungarian-made movie, and you would have thought that, being that it's Hungarian-made, it would at least be objective, not again show the enemy of Hungary as the good guy and the actual Hungarian Christians as well. We'll see. All right. So first of all, nobody in this series is actually a real Christian. Okay. Everyone's a perfunctory Christian. It's kind of like, we say it, we talk about it because we have to. We make the sign of the cross, whatever. Let's get on with it. Okay. And again, if you've watched other movies or series, you may be familiar with this sort of dynamic and how it's portrayed. All right. And this includes John Hunyadi. He's brave, he's a fighter. But like I said, he's very two-dimensional. He definitely doesn't have a spiritual side that appears. And there's only once, and I was impressed with this, very, very towards the end, they actually have him say, something like one line about, we're fighting for Christ. Okay. Wow. In fact, in reality, that's all he said quite often. All right. So, but I was actually impressed that they managed to squeeze that in. Maybe they were concerned that there would be too much criticism had they not. Okay. But the examples of the belittling the Christianity in juxtaposition with sort of praising and glorifying atheism, and I'll get to that, and Islam, is all throughout this series. Okay. And in very subtle ways. Again, these are ways that most people would not catch. Okay. They're very subliminal. And that's the whole point, because you keep watching these sorts of movies and series, they're always subliminal, but they build up in your head. And then there's a sort of archetype or a paradigm with which you see religion and Christianity and atheism and Islam. Right. So for example, when the young king Ladislaus, and spare me, okay, I may not be pronouncing these names right. I know it has a W or a V and it's pronounced like a W, but it's been anglicized as Ladislaus. And there's many of those kings in Poland and in Hungary. So when this is the one who dies at Varna, the young king, at the Battle of Varna in 1444. At one point, he was an idealistic king, and he actually, at the battle, he died and got decapitated by the Muslims. But at one point in the series, they show him talking about the forthcoming battle as a holy war, and Hunyadi gets all cringe, like kind of like he's embarrassed by all this silly talk about holy war. All right. So that's one scene that sort of caught my eye, which seemed kind of like, again, like I said, anachronistic. Especially, I'll give you some quotes that go completely contrary to that sort of depiction. Another one, all right, this is pretty much par for the course. So the main enemy in the beginning of the series is Ottoman Sultan Murad II. All right. And he was a pretty important sultan. He's the father of Muhammad II, the conqueror of Constantinople. And under their reign, there was a lot of expansion, conquest into the Balkans. All right. At one point, Murad, the sultan, tells his son, Muhammad II, he has him, they're at court, and he says, something comes up where I think Muhammad says something, they believe in their Christian God, about the Europeans. And Murad says, let me show you about their Christian God and who they really worship. Okay. And then he calls in some merchant, some Italian, Venetian or Genoese, Italian, Murad does in front of his son. And he basically wants him to betray the Christians by, I think, ferrying over, I don't know, thousands of Ottoman Turks into some Christian land. And immediately the Venetian or the Italian merchant just gets shocked. How dare you? You're asking me to betray my religion. And then Murad basically tells him, I'm going to be paying you X amount, thousands of whatever gold pieces. Ooh, and immediately he changes his tune, the Christian man, total sellout. So, well, how did this start? Murad was telling his son, let me show you about the Christians and their God. And that's how it ends up. Then there's another scene where this woman, she's the Serbian despot's daughter, who basically, and this part's true, she's given to Murad to become one of his concubines. And she goes and she becomes his concubine. And according, I don't know if this is the case in reality, but in Netflix, then eventually after, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years, she gets to leave and go back to her home. And so all she wants to do now, after she was a concubine for the Sultan, is to go to a monastery, a convent of nuns, so she can become a nun for the rest of her life. And the head nun meets her and seems very open and sympathetic, but then finally gives her this look, kind of like, well, the only way if you really want to come in, you have to pay us gold. So here we go again, just like the earlier scene, with that Italian merchant. Here again, the Christians, all they really care about is money. All that talk about piety, it's all lies, it's all fake. And then she gives him the gold, apparently, because she becomes a nun, and she's a model nun. She lives there for years. And then when right before the siege of Belgrade, when Muhammad II starts advancing, the head nun, the same one that demanded money of her, says, okay, everyone feels uncomfortable because the Sultan who you were a concubine to, or whatever, because she wasn't his concubine, his father's. And so now we want you to leave because you were the devil's concubine. And then they kick her out because that's what Christians do, right? According to Hollywood. Then there's another scene where the papal legate, the representative of the Pope, who's on one of these campaigns, which I guess is how I mentioned the long campaign is not in there. It's not. But they sort of imply something very similar to it right before the Battle of Varna, which is not accurate because there were like 2 years, I think, at least, between the long campaign. But they show that. So the long campaign is they went into and started. John Hunyadi and the army went into subject territories of the Ottomans, Serbian territories, Bulgarian territories, and liberated them. At this point, the Serbs and the Bulgarians are vassals. Okay, they're subjugated. They're subjects of the Ottomans, and they're paying the jizya, and they're giving up their children to become janissaries. Not a good thing. And in the series, they show that this papal legate, the main Christian guy with the cross, all he wants to do as the army of John Hunyadi liberates these Bulgarian and Serbian villages is force. They were Orthodox, the Serbs and the Bulgarians, is force them to become Catholic, and he tortures them, and they turn against him, against the army of John Hunyadi because they're being tortured, and they talk about how the Muslims are much more tolerant of their religion, and the only problem with that is it's completely a lie. That never happened at all. Yeah, Catholics and Orthodox have had their issues, including a little before then. But for example, the sack of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade. And I double checked, that didn't happen during the long campaign or during the time when Hunyadi and King Ladislaus were liberating Bulgarian and Serbian towns. So in fact, I pulled up, and let me read it to you. So the Netflix series, or this series, wants you to think that wherever the Hunyadi's army, and they portray Hunyadi as being against this because, as we mentioned, he's not really a Christian, he's a secularist, and he flips out and he yells at the papal legate, representative of the Pope, for torturing all these Orthodox into becoming Catholics. And he says, this isn't what it's about. We're not here to do this. We're here to fight the Ottomans, etc., etc. So actually, here's a little quote now from it's actually from my book, but most of these are actual quotes. So there's quotations, but I'm just going to read it to you to give you an idea. So by late November, they had reached this army, Sofia in Bulgaria, more than 450 miles whence the Crusaders had first started marching during the long campaign. Considering that Sofia had been under Islamic rule for more than half a century, since 1382, this is around 1445, I think, the long oppressed Bulgarians went wild with joy. That's an actual quote. Liberator and liberated reconverted the mosques back into churches and worshipped in them, giving thanks. The long cherished dream of freedom from Islamic domination was becoming palpable. The Balkan peoples became excited by the hope of their liberation, which appeared close. The local population welcomed them everywhere with gifts and food, so that the soldiers hardly used the supplies they had brought along. The camp of the king became filled with Bulgarians, Bosnians, Serbians, and Albanians. According to the sources from that time, the population was very much set against its Turkish oppressors. You won't at all get that impression watching this series, okay? Because those pesky, crazy Christian elements in the army, all they wanted to do is torture these Balkan, the Serbs and the Albanians and the Bulgarians and the Bosnians, overwhelmingly Orthodox people. They were torturing them into becoming Catholics. That's not what that says, what I just read to you. That's a primary source, okay? Then there's another interesting element underscoring Hunyadi's sort of annoyance with Christianity. He's always, so a pivotal character is John Capistrano, an Italian friar. And he becomes very important at the Siege of Belgrade, and I'll mention him at that point. But he's when he comes up to John Hunyadi and wants to help him and work with him in the series, John Hunyadi is kind of like, get out of here. You're just a priest. I'm looking for fighting men. You're going to get yourself killed, you and your peasant crusaders. I want nothing to do with you. And John Capistrano keeps following him around, and Hunyadi again is very annoyed with him and constantly tells him just to leave. You have nothing to offer, you and your religion. Actually, in a letter, Hunyadi wrote to John Capistrano, the friar, right before the Siege of Belgrade. He said, "Come hither to me, Hunyadi," to Capistrano, "come hither to me, that the power of God may sustain the efforts of men." Actual quote. All right. And then, speaking of Belgrade, once that major siege happens, which again, when you watch the series, thankfully they do have the Siege of Belgrade, though they take liberties with that too. But again, there's no sort of religious talk because Hunyadi is just some pragmatist. He doesn't care. But now I'm going to read to you an actual quote of what he did say. Again, it's from my book. It's in here. It's on page 200. So actually, let me pull it up. This is an example of what and this is just one example of how he talked, which you would never think he did talk this way, based on the Fabio character, the womanizer who commits adultery, the way he talked in the series. So, I'm almost there. Bear with me. Here we go. All right, here we go. So, right before the Siege of Belgrade, he said the following words to inspire and ennoble the men, the fighters. All right, he said, quote, "What fear you? Is this the first time you have seen the Turks? Are not these the very same we have so often put to flight, and who have sometimes put us to flight? Why should their familiar aspect disturb you now? Surely you know by this time what manner of men they are. Be of stout heart then, my dear sons. Put your trust in Christ. Did he not die for us? And should we then account it a hardship to die for him? Be valiant then, and strive manfully. If God be with us, the foe will prove a coward. What more need I say to you? when you have already proved the truth of my word so many times beneath my banner. All right. Now, whatever you make of these words, someone can say, "Oh, that's not sincere," or "He's just speaking by route," or whatever. That is how he talked, and you would not in any way, shape, or form get that impression watching this particular series and how he talks there, which is nothing like that at all. As I told you, he's constantly annoyed with the religious people. He's attacking them because they're hypocrites. He wants none of their help or guidance, including John Capistrano, who, as we saw, John Hunyadi, had himself actually begged to come and help lead the men with his inspiring words. Okay. Now, then there's the death of John Hunyadi. Um, he died soon after the defense of Belgrade in 1456 because he contracted the plague. And in the series, he's goes and he's with his family, and then he just dies, and there's certainly nothing religious about it. But in the actual sources, let me read it to you now. When Hunyadi felt his demise draw nigh, he begged his old comrade, John Capistrano, who, again, in this series is just some crazy, nutty friar who John is always trying to get away from. So, according to this rendering, early one, he begged his old comrade, Capistrano, to transport him to the local church for his final communion. The Franciscan told him to rest. The Eucharist would be brought to him. Not so, retorted John Hunyadi. It is not meet that the master should come to his servant. It is for the servant to go and seek his Lord. Then, although his strength was failing, writes the chronicler, he ordered himself to be carried into a church, where he made his confession in the Christian way, received the Eucharist, and surrendered his soul to God in the arms of the priests. Well, pretty interesting. Definitely not the way it was portrayed in the series at all. You wouldn't have, again, he seemed sort of, he didn't want anything to do with this crazy, silly, superstitious religion, because he's more advanced than that. And again, when you watch it, it makes sense because that's who we are. That's how we think. So when you watch a series or a movie or whatever, and those people behave like you do, well, it makes sense. But like I said, I have a big problem with that because we are a peculiar people compared to most people historically. And it simply won't do to project our ways onto them and who they were. So now, and now let me really get into one of the most obvious points where this sort of thing really happens. There's a guy, I think his name is Sele. He's supposed to be another noble who's sort of contending, an opponent of Hunyadi. And he is a 21st century atheist. Okay. Which means he's a complete anachronism because you could not have that kind of thing back then. And I'll get into it. He's enlightened. He sees all religion as stupid. He doesn't care about Christianity or Islam or any other religion. They're all superstitions as far as he's concerned. And he's a very sympathetic figure. In the beginning, he comes off sort of like a jerk. You think he's just some, a conniving, power-hungry character, and he is. But he starts. He's okay. You know how I said John Hunyadi is sort of a two-dimensional character. This guy's not. He has depth, and the more you watch him, the more he's a sympathetic character. You sort of understand why he is the way he is. And at one point, he says he's happy to submit to the Ottomans, and he tells someone, he points at the peasants, the Hungarian peasants, and basically says, how bad would it be if they had a wash and they learned how to read and they sobered up? Because if you're a Muslim, his point is, if they became Muslim subjects, they wouldn't drink alcohol, they'd learn how to read, and they'd wash themselves because of Muslim ablutions. And then he mockingly says, and the only difference is there'd be a crescent on top of their place of worship as opposed to a cross. Okay. Now, the problem with all this is that kind of guy, of course, exists today for real. That's a real person. I have no problem with that. But that is a complete anachronism for the 15th century. The atheist of today, okay, there's a lot of forces that have forged him without which he could not exist. And those forces did not exist in the 15th century. You could be non-religious in the 15th century, but I think the sort of atheism that they try to attribute to him, which is, I think at one point he's talking about the Big Bang theory and that sort of thing. I think it's completely impossible. You could be unreligious, you could be definitely not pious, worldly, whatever. I'm sure there was a lot of that. But again, he's sort of portrayed as the paradigmatic, enlightened 21st century atheist who looks down on all this stupidity of religion and religious quarreling, and he gets it. um, so again, that character, like I said, he's sort of presented as a villain, but the more you watch, the more you understand they're trying to portray him as a very sympathetic character, and you start understanding why he is the way he is. Well, because he's just like us at a time when no one was like us. And now we must come to the worst misrepresentations of all. Earlier, I told you that one of the reasons that this particular series caught my attention is not only because of the reasons I told you about Hungary and the dates and Hunyadi's in my book, but both Vlads, Vlad the Impaler, the famous Vlad Dracula III, and his father, who's also an important figure at this time. He was a contemporary with Hunyadi, about the same age. Vlad II also appear in this series. And boy, oh boy, they are just, once again, Vlad the Impaler gets the absolute worst treatment of any in this particular series, insofar as misrepresenting and distorting and lying about who and what he was. Okay. So it starts off, like I said, with his father, Vlad II. And we have a lot of information about him. He's portrayed like this rat-like, kind of very gross character. Literally, he looks like a rat, skinny, kind of with like whiskers, and they have all these scenes where he's like sitting around eating just like sordid food, kind of a disgusting character. He is presented as the originator of impalement, where his son, Vlad Dracula III, perfected. So just to be clear, we're talking about two Vlads. The famous Vlad Dracula, who's in my book, I have a chapter 8, is Vlad III. I'm talking about his father, who was Vlad II. So they portray Vlad II in this series as being somehow the innovator and practitioner of impalement. Guess what? He never impaled anyone. Not a single historical source says that Vlad the father engaged in impalement at all. Okay. But he's shown right from the start as being this savage impaler, and even the Ottomans, as I'll get into it, are shocked by his savagery and brutality. Then he's also the father, Vlad II, father of our Dracula. He, at one point, after the Battle of Varna, and this is, or after the Battle of Varna, Hunyadi survives. This is where the Christians lose, and the king, Ladislaus, gets decapitated. Hunyadi gets captured by Dracula II. Well, actually, he did get captured, not necessarily after the Battle of Varna, and they're sort of conflating it. It was actually after the Second Battle of Kosovo, where it was also a defeat, and he got captured. But he got captured by Serbians, not by Vlad II. So once again, they show Vlad II, the father, as this sort of, again, not just unsavory, but definitely the anti-hero, because he's now imprisoning Hunyadi. And at one point, Vlad II makes it a point to tell John Hunyadi, as he imprisons him, that he appreciates and likes the Ottomans, the Muslim Turks, more because at least they don't force my people to become their religion. Remember how I told you earlier that during, what was conflated as the long campaign, but there's this little scene right before Varna where the Catholic representative of the Pope is torturing Orthodox people, like Vlad's people, to become Catholics. So they're playing on that idea again, even though that never happened. So here you have Vlad praising the Ottoman Turks because they are religiously tolerant, as opposed to the Catholics and the Hungarians, what they were doing. Okay. And do we really need to get into what the Ottoman Turks did to actual Christians? Yeah, they were tolerant in the sense that after they conquered and enslaved and killed everyone they wanted. Then for the remainder, they were willing to extort money out of them, called jizya, for them to be subjects and periodically take their sons and daughters as janissaries and concubines. So that's the great toleration that's portrayed in this series. Now, young Vlad. Now, so that's the father. Now let's move on to Dracula, the Impaler, Vlad the Impaler, the son. He, as I had mentioned, is once again completely distorted. I think that's poor Vlad's lot. He's like the most distorted, demonized character. And again, this isn't to say the guy's innocent. I mean, yeah, he was engaged in a lot of violence, but you have to understand it in context. And that not only is that context completely absent from what we're talking about, but they just literally lie about everything. His timeline, what he did, and okay. So it starts off. The true story of Vlad is at one point he is taken by Murad the second, and Murad the Sultan Ottoman, the father of Muhammad the second. He's taken as a hostage, him and his brother, and they're thrown essentially into a Ottoman prison. Now, according, excuse me, by the way, it's indigestion. But according to the sources, they were both in prison, and Vlad was beaten all the time because he was a very recalcitrant, rebellious, non-obedient kind of guy. Kind of makes sense. This is in his teens when he was young, and he was a hostage of the Ottomans. His brother Radu, however, eventually capitulated, and we're going to get into how he capitulated because that's very telling. Well, basically, so what happens is the real okay in the show. Here's what happens. Radu, so Muhammad II has an older brother, Ali, and Ali is supposed to become the next sultan after the father, Murad. And Ali turns all of a sudden after the captivity. The two Romanian sons, Vlad and Radu, the sons of Vlad II, are taken into captivity and are hostages. You just see a scene where Ali, the favored of Murad, the forthcoming sultan, is just basically in bed with Radu because they're having sex because they're homosexuals. Um, and Muhammad II sees this, and he's definitely not happy with this. He's not for that because he's obviously pretty straight. Okay, and now here's where that idea comes from, and here's how it's twisted. The truth is that when they were imprisoned, Vlad and his brother Radu the handsome, obviously he was a good-looking guy, the younger brother Radu. There's a story where, and it's actually in a very early contemporary source. It's in my book. Um, it's all documented there. But basically, Muhammad II, okay, not his brother, was kind of attracted to Radu and made a pass at him. And it was so shocking and traumatizing to the young Romanian that he almost killed Muhammad II with a dagger. And he tried to stab him, and he did stab him in the leg, and then he ran away because of he couldn't believe this homosexual advance from from the young Muslim prince Muhammad II, and he climbed up a tree until essentially the viziers and Muhammad II brought him down. And long story short, he eventually became Muhammad II's boy toy. Okay, and they had this sexual relationship. But in the actual series, as I just told you, it's not Muhammad II who forcibly turned the Vlad the Impaler's younger brother to become his catamite. It's someone else, Ali, who's an indispensable character because he dies soon. So I thought that was interesting. Why do that? I thought Hollywood loves to be sexual and sexual sensationalism. Why not say the truth that Muhammad II, this pivotal character in this series, is the one, in fact, who sexually coerced this young Romanian Christian to become his boy toy? Is it because, it's because they're trying to show you how Muhammad II was this great hero, because they definitely magnify him and show him as a noble character, both and especially his father, Murad II. even though in reality they were what you would call today terrorists, because all they did is invade, destroy churches, slaughter and enslave men and women, women for sex, men sometimes for sex, but for hard labor and for other sadistic usages. Um, so it's kind of interesting. Why did they have to do that? Um, why why not tell us the truth that it was Muhammad II? At any rate, so Vlad the Impaler, the young Dracula, is then also presented. Eventually, he gets Muhammad II releases him from prison because his boyfriend Radu told him to. So he releases him, and then Vlad the Impaler becomes his henchman, this sadistic, savage henchman that does whatever Muhammad II wants, including he attacks a woman, this concubine of Murad II, attacks her, rapes her, and of course bites her on the neck and sucks her blood. Because what else does Dracula do? Needless to say, none of that has any historical foundation whatsoever. Okay, at all. If anything, what we know about the real Vlad the Impaler is that he hated the Ottomans, that he hated Muhammad II for taking his brother and raping him and turning him into his catamites. That's what history actually tells. But here they make him into his henchman, and he works for the Muslims to the point that he's at the siege of Belgrade, the pivotal point of all that we're talking about. This is the great defense of John Hunyadi, where I mentioned he dies afterwards of the plague. At this great siege in 1456, guess who's there leading the army? It's Vlad the Impaler. And he's whipping the Turks and forcing them, and he's impaling them because they're not fighting hard enough and they're not fully committed to taking over Belgrade, to the point that Muhammad II, of course, who's there, tells him, no, stop. This is too much. Are you trying to kill all my men? They need a break. Actually, in the history, it was Muhammad himself. I don't know. He did impale, of course, his own men that failed him. But I do remember distinctly Muhammad II is the one that whips his men and yells at them and threatens to kill them, and I think kills some of them for not fighting hard enough. But again, it's the hapless Vlad the Impaler who gets this reputation, even though. Now, guess what was really happening in 1456 at the time, at the siege of Belgrade, when, according to this series on Netflix, Vlad is the sadistic henchman of Muhammad II. He was actually allied with Hunyadi, and he was tasked with securing the eastern Transylvanian borders against the Ottomans during the siege. That's what he was really doing. Isn't that really interesting? Think about it. So Vlad the Impaler, as he's known, Vlad Dracula III, okay, who hated the Ottomans, who was their hostage, who was tortured by them, and whose brother was raped in front of him, essentially, okay, and who broke away from them and became the most zealous fighter against them after Hunyadi. This is what I'm talking about now, 1456. Vlad is still very young, even though he is like I said, he's allied with Hunyadi and defending the forces. He's probably like 20 years old. But after Hunyadi dies and so forth, he becomes the chief scourge of the Ottomans and even defeats Muhammad II much later on, I think in 1462. Like I said, I got a whole chapter about both of these guys right here if you want the absolute facts, okay? But isn't it funny that this guy, and by the way, Vlad the Impaler, just like John Hunyadi, I read to you a few quotes of the piety of John Hunyadi. Vlad was the same. In his letters, surviving letters to Hunyadi's son, who was then the king, Matthias Corvinus, during the larger attack on Wallachia, all he does is talk about defending Christendom, fighting for the faith, and being basically an existential enemy of the Ottoman Muslims. All right. None of that, any hint of that appears in the series. He is, like I said, a bloodsucker. His father was a mastermind of impalement, even though he never did. Not a single record says his father did it. Okay. And he, of course, Vlad was the impaler. But guess where he learned it from? He learned it during his hostage years under the Ottomans, because that's what the Ottomans did. But there's a scene actually where Murad, the first sultan, when he sees all these impaled people that the father, Vlad II, had impaled, he's shocked and disgusted. This is too sadistic. Actually, it's the Ottomans that did that sort of thing before Vlad the Impaler, the son, did it. Okay. And the reason Vlad perfected the art of impalement was basically to fight fire with fire against the Ottomans. Okay. Just as they were terrorizing, the Ottomans and a lot of other Muslim empires, they would quote the Quran verses that say, strike terror into the hearts of the infidel. And they would devise extremely sadistic and cruel methods of torturing and killing the infidel, Christians in this case. So what Vlad was essentially doing was fighting fire with fire. He said, "Oh, you're doing impalements. Well, I'm going to do it 10 times as much to your people." And in the context of his times, this was the only way to do it because he was much outnumbered. The Wallachians were just basically like a hill people, shepherds, fighting the largest, most powerful, and sophisticated army empire at the time, the Ottomans. So that's why he was engaged in these sort of guerrilla warfare, which he also did. But anyway, I was telling you, just again to show you, Murad II, the Sultan, the father of Muhammad, is often shocked by the cruelty of the Romanians, of Vlad II, the father, and the impalement. But now let me read to you an actual quote of what happened after the Battle of Varna, which I told you about. This was a pivotal battle where the Christians lost, and Murad II, the Sultan, was there. At the time, there were so many bodies, so many tens of thousands of slain and maimed people thrown all over the place on the ground that it took the Sultan 3 days to even realize he had won because he wasn't sure what's going on. And then once he found out, quote, in accordance with a barbarous custom, the Sultan ordered tables to be set and held a feast among the corpses of the vanquished. Okay. And then as for the king's head, the young Ladislaus head, which I told you he was beheaded during this battle, Murad had it flayed and the skin stuffed with various roots and cotton so that it would not spoil. And he had the hair combed and prepared with sulfide so that it would be made up as if it were alive. And he ordered that this head be stuck on a pike and carried about all his cities as proof that Allah had let him vanquish his enemy. Now, that's the original sources, okay? But in the series, this guy, Murad II, is just shocked and appalled by any kind of sadistic or cruel, unusual methods of punishment and killing, such as the impalement that he supposedly saw by Vlad II, who never once impaled anyone because we don't have any historical record saying he did. But Hollywood needs you to see that that's what the Christians do, while the Muslims who actually do that sort of thing are shocked and appalled. Par for the course, isn't it? I was talking about Muhammad II and how he basically turned Vlad the Impaler's brother Radu into his little boy toy. Muhammad II's sexuality is something else. Okay. And I have 3 books where I talk about it and every one of those books has different angles because the sources are so many. But basically, he was what would today be called a pedophile, a bisexual, a homosexual. He slept with anything and everyone, and there was a lot of sadism and torture and so forth. You would never get that idea watching the series. He seems like a troubled youth who's just trying to I don't know, make his dad proud, and he's been traumatized in his youth, and he's a little wayward, but with a little love and attention, maybe he'll straighten out. That sort of thing. But all right, so that's my problem. That's the issue I have with the series that I'm talking about, the Rise of the Raven, as it's called. Like I said, as an actual series compared to the sorts of things that are out there, it's not bad. Yeah, go ahead, watch it if you want, if you're into that sort of thing. But again, it's not bad because most of the other things out there are just pathetic and ridiculous and even stupider than what I just told you. Okay. And it's just mind-boggling. Why do they always have to do this? One of my arguments has always been, When I wrote this book, okay, I always say this, Defenders of the West, it's 8 biographies of defenders, and one of them is Hunyadi, one of them is Vlad the Impaler. That's why I know a thing or two about this. But what I've always said is, if you read it and it's fundamentally based on primary sources, you will be taken aback at just how spectacular these stories are based on the primary sources. They don't need Hollywood to stick its fingers in it and change it. The stories themselves are remarkable. Okay. Excuse me. Like I told you, there's the long campaign, which doesn't, this was to me the most important part of John Hunyadi's career. And they didn't even mention it. And like I told you, I had to suffer all these different episodes of just nonsense and soap opera style stuff, telling myself, well, it'll be worth it because eventually you'll get the good stuff, you'll get the long campaign, and of course it never showed, which is just shocking. Okay, so the material is there. The true story itself is remarkable enough that if you made a movie based purely on it, it would be a great movie. But they don't do that, right? They actually that's the whole thing now, right? Hollywood likes to appropriate noble figures, noble names, and then recast it into their image. Okay. And it's it's a very disgusting image, which one never finds appealing. You see this all the time with what they did with Token. What's it called? Rings of Power, where okay, they use the name of Token because everyone loves Token. So let's use the Token's name. Let's take his whatever posthumous stories, independences, and whatever, but then they completely recast them. They have absolutely so the story that they give you has nothing to do with Token. Token himself is probably turning in his grave if he sees any of this stuff. Okay, but they want to use the name. So here, once again, they're using the name John Hunyadi and this. Keep in mind, I'm sure not a lot of Americans are watching this, but this was made in Hungarian language. So I'm sure a lot of Hungarians have seen this episode or would be sort of exposed to it. And what is it? If had they merely stuck to the script, that is to say, had they merely stuck to the actual historical account, it would have been great just in and of itself. And if you want to see the historical account, like I said, you can just see my chapter. I only keep mentioning it because if it's really based on the primary sources. I'm not conjecturing. I'm just showing you what the actual contemporaries said. And that's all we have. So there's no need, there's no call to surmise and create stories, especially when it's the opposite of what the source says. So again, you got to ask yourself, why do they always do this? It's not just with this, like I said at the beginning, I think in a way, this series is just like a paradigm of something I see all the time. I've always liked sort of medieval movies. And I remember just from my youth, always liking them. And if you watch any of them, okay, I challenge you, go watch, especially big budget ones, famous ones. There's always going to be a lot of themes that will never change. Okay. First of all, if you know anything about the medieval era, it was a very hardcore Christian time. Everywhere there were crosses and icons and paintings, and everyone was making the sign of the cross and the name of God and Christ, and everyone was on their mouth. Okay, whatever was in their heart, okay, fine. But it permeated society. Anytime you watch a movie now that's about the medieval era, first of all, you don't see any of that. And when you do, okay, whoever is holding the cross, whoever has the tiara on, whoever is basically the religious guy, they are always the most despicable characters. Okay, always. All right, prove me wrong. Any movie that's, again, medieval era. All right, and why medieval era? Because, like I told you, that was a time where Christianity and mores were really at an all-time high as far as a civilization and cultural expectations. But they always will show you, if you watch any movie, okay, I'm trying to remember now because I forget. Okay, how about Excalibur? I used to like that movie, right? Early 80s, I think. I like the movie, but first of all, you wouldn't even know Christianity exists. There's not a single cross, not a single anything. It would have been everywhere, all right? And it's just kind of like, yeah, we're knights. the whole idea of a knight is embedded and tied with Christianity. To be a knight without Christianity is completely inconceivable, right? And yet they have all these knights who are basically just like secular warriors, essentially. And that's and that's just and that's not even that bad. Which is I'm talking about Excalibur. But there's Kingdom of Heaven, which I mentioned, which deals with the Crusades as well. And what's the opening scene? You know, the hero Balian. That's actually a historical figure, but of course he's mangled in the movie. But it's something like some monk or some priest. Balian's wife is dead. Apparently, she committed suicide, and the priest cynically says she's going to hell. And then later, Balian sees him robbing her cross. The priest robbing this dead corpse's cross and kills him. Okay, because that's what they do. Anyone who's a Christian is greedy, of course. Um, and all Saladin is sort of smart and shrewd, but all the knights screaming Deus Vult are stupid and caricatures and silly. That's just that's just Kingdom of Heaven. I'm still forgetting. Okay, how about here's another one I remember, Beowulf. You ever see the Beowulf movie, which is I don't know, like a cartoon? It came out maybe like I don't know, late 2000s, where I don't know what you call them. It's like cartoon movie-ish. And it's not as a movie, it's not bad. And this is supposed to be a time where paganism and Christianity are sort of coming into conflict, and there's a tension between them. And Beowulf, of course, is a pagan at this time, even though in the actual original text he's not. And people say it's an interpolation, but whatever. And but there's one guy who sort of starts off. He's kind of this annoying character. I don't even remember his name. If you watch it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But then he becomes a Christian because Christianity reaches the northern lands at this point, and he becomes just the most insufferable annoying. He walks around with a cross. He's a hypocrite. He beats his servant, and he's just a really distasteful person. So it just never, ever, ever fails. I challenge you, next time you watch a movie that deals with medieval history, medieval Christianity, watch how the guy with the cross is going to be portrayed. And I guarantee you, he's going to be a very unsavory, very hypocritical person. And I'm just wondering, what's that about? Is that just I don't know, we're trying to make a good movie? Or is this part of a long-term project of sort of infiltrating and molding how people think about Christianity? Because if you think in the past all people were like modern day whatever, well, yeah, that's going to justify you, and that's going to sort of convince and confirm you to continue living that way. But if you were to realize, oh, there was a time when actually people who call themselves Christians behaved like Christians, not like atheists or materialists, that, you know, we don't want you to realize that. Okay, we want you always to remember that anyone and everyone throughout history were just like us, and even more so. They were all committing adultery. They were all sleeping around. They were all homosexuals and bisexuals and whatever. Okay, so I personally am sick and tired of seeing that in movies, and it's just because it's so tiresome. It's so obviously agenda driven, and it's so obviously meant to degrade men and women. Because if they convince you to think and believe this, well, you're going to act that way. You know, here's my final take about movies and TV in general. And what I'm going to tell you is based on decades. I'm 52, so when I remember when I was young, and you'd watch whatever, let's say the 80s is when I came of age. I guess I'm born in 73, so I'm a teenager in the mid 80s, mid to late 80s. And you know, you'd watch movies, you'd watch sitcoms, you'd watch whatever. And we did a lot of watching TV at that time. If we didn't have laptops or computers or internet, of course, and you just watch whatever's on TV, these sitcoms, which were supposed to be harmless entertainment, right? Well, I don't think that's what they were, because what they did is they normalized certain kinds of behavior, especially sexual behavior. So I remember any kind of movie or any show I would watch, especially if it dealt with teenagers, right? And I was a teenager. All the teenagers were profligates. They were all out to party. They all wanted to have sex. No one was a virgin. Only the idiots and the losers were virgins, including women. Okay. Now, and that was everything. Now, here's a question. Was it like that? Because this is what I thought when I was young. Oh, these movie makers and directors are just trying to capture reality. So they're making movies based on reality, which is, oh, that's what teenagers and whatever do. They're all trying to party and get laid, as it were. Right. Okay. Now I've come to realize I don't think that's what it is. I think that's what they want people to think. Okay. So as a young man, if you watch that and you think that's how people act, well, you're impressionable. You're a young man, you're a young woman, whatever. You're impressionable. People are impressionable. Guess what's going to happen? You're going to act that way. Your friends are going to act that way. And everyone's going to confirm that narrative. So it never was really done that way because the writers wanted to capture reality. Rather, they wanted you to follow what they were presenting to you as reality. Okay, so it was the ultimate sort of mind job, and I honestly think that's what it was, and what it continues to be till this point. So that's why all these movies and series, they're always so sexually depraved, much more than reality. You would think if they cared about society, what would be good? To ennoble us, to give us something to inspire to, show us piety, show us virtue, show us restraint. But they don't. All they do is they show you actually much worse behavior than you are capable of, because they're trying to drag you down. And I think that's the whole thing that I've learned from decades of watching television, watching things on the internet, watching these series. They're trying to convince impressionable people, because most people are impressionable. All right. Most young people don't know what they're doing. If you're a teenager or younger, or if you're an adult, actually, at this point, you have no confidence in yourself, probably. And when you see everything around you acts a certain way, because everyone on TikTok and everyone on Instagram and everyone on X and everyone on the internet and everyone on everything acts a certain way, you will actually find yourself gravitating and acting that way because you think that's normalcy. It's not. It's what they want you to think, and what they want you to condition you into being. And anyway, this big ramble and tangent is my way of saying that the John Hunyadi, the Rising Raven, it's part of that genre where they just introduce filth and smut and impiety and atheism. And it's not because they're capturing reality, because as I just showed you, it's not reality. It's complete opposite of what actually happened historically. But they do it because they want you to think that is how people always have been, always will be, and are. And if that's what you think, well, it's going to be easy. It's going to be a lot harder to resist and not succumb to what they want you to do. And that's the whole project, I think. All right, let us let's see what you all are saying here. And thanks for joining me. I hope this was moderately edifying. I know it's ultimately not a very important topic. We're talking on the veneer of a series, right? But I hope you see how these little things all add up and how they have a massive impact on people's minds. Think about it. Where do we get our epistemology? Where do we get our knowledge? Again, especially if you're a young woman or man or young person, it's not from reading books. Like, yeah, right. It's from what you see. And what you see is carefully curated everywhere. And it's the same exact message. And it's a lie. And that's why it's so obvious to someone like me, because I know it's a lie, because history completely and manifestly contradicts it. So why do they always and everywhere insist on the exact opposite? Well, my theory is the reason. All right. It's almost 10 p.m. where I'm at. And you people are just starting your day. All right. New member. Hey, greetings. Thanks for joining. JHB. Why was it Christians versus Muslims during the Crusades, but now it's Jews versus Muslims on the news? Why did Christians leave the fight? Well, it seems like these are two separate questions. Jews and Muslims are on the news because it's a localized, particular fight, which is flared out right now and has been for some decades. The question of why did Christians leave the fight? Well, that's the real question, right? And I have my own theories, which I have discussed many times. Most of them are connected to the idea of doormat Christianity, which is, again, based on movies and based on the entire cultural messaging. A real Christian, a good Christian, never, ever, ever, ever fights. He just remains as a doormat, okay, which means anyone can do what they please, because the whole point of Christianity is to say, oh, I forgive and I tolerate, do what you want, I love you, haha, we're all saved, right? So that's why Christians, and I say that very loosely, don't fight. Corporal Marcellus. Hello. You taught me about Islam and Christian heroism. Thank you. You're welcome. Can you teach me more about honor, strength, virtue, spirit, and how to obtain such things? I want to learn these from you. Thank you. Wow. No, well, first I commend you for even realizing that this is what really matters: honor, strength, virtue, and spirit. That is really the source of that we seldom talk about. And and why I don't talk about it, though I do think about it often and have strong thoughts on these matters that you just raised about honor and so forth. And I've done a lot of reading in old books about it. They don't exist anymore. Have you ever thought? I'm glad you bring this up, but things like honor and virtue. Let's just stick with honor, okay, and virtue, which are very much the same. Virtus, truth, about clinging to the truth no matter what. That's virtue, right? And honor. Okay, here's the thing. What do those words even mean today? I know what they mean. Do you ever hear anyone talk about honor and virtue? As a society, whoever brings up honor and virtue? It used to be back in olden days amongst, let's say, the Romans, honor and virtue was something you're going to teach children. Do we ever talk about honor and virtue? Do children know what does that even mean? These are meaningless words. Okay. How about masculinity? How about femininity as opposed to feminism? And I always find that ironic. The same root, two exact opposite meanings. But that's the society we are. These words have lost absolute meaning, all meaning, and they need to come back, because without things like honor, virtue, spirit, being noble, and I don't mean like aristocracy noble, not your blood, but just behaving nobly. Does anyone even know what that means anymore? Do these words have any meaning? Used to be that societies were built and governed by these words. Okay, honor and virtue and strength and discipline. Okay, yeah, these are not the things that we're taught. These are not the things that our society prizes. We're taught the exact opposite. As I mentioned before, I did a little sort of deep dive in what's called the 7 deadly sins. Let's see if I remember them. I always forget, but pride, wrath, lust, sloth, gluttony, envy. You see, I got 6 this time. Usually I stop at 5. Anyway, those things were considered the most evil sins of all. More than things. Notice killing, murder is not one of them. Why? Because murder is actually a byproduct of things like wrath and pride and greed and envy. So it wasn't mentioned. But when I looked at those words, far from actually talking about those words or condemning them or teaching children against them, our entire society is built on promoting and praising every single one of those things. Pride, isn't that a cornerstone of our civilization? Especially when you have none, when you do and engage in acts that have zero pride in them. It's kind of interesting. Um, Lust. Oh my God, this is that's all. What did I just get done talking about? These series, all they want to show you is sex, sex, and more sex, the kind of sex that never even happened. Okay, because they want to put it in your mind that that's how it is. What else? Wrath, envy. These are all things that are constantly glorified in movies, right? Sloth. That's basically, I think, one of the least appreciated errors. And that's what sins are. They're errors. They're missing the mark that really dominates, especially Western culture. Greed. Greed. That's like a hallmark of being a successful Western person, right? So, far from talking about honor and virtue and things that really, really matter and make us better people and make us have a more qualitatively superior life, we're constantly being degraded by having around us what Christianity for centuries considered were the absolute worst sins that we as a people must constantly fight against. They are what basically governs our entire society. Think about that. Anyway, thanks for your insightful observation. Coltrane, the Turk beater, is a legend, which is why they have such disdain for him. Devoted, disciplined, and capable were the warriors such as Hunyadi. Keep calling out these haters of our Christian warriors, Brother Raymond. Yeah, thank you. The Turk beater. Yeah, I think maybe you're talking about Hunyadi per se, or just the warriors in general. Yeah. See, that's the thing. When if you watch this series, you're not even going to get the idea that the Ottomans and the Muslims posed this massive existential threat to Europe, and that they were enslaving hundreds of thousands and millions over the years and decades and centuries. That they were just an abominable scourge. It's just kind of like just different polities feuding with each other, and this group sides with the Ottomans and this group doesn't. And there was some of that, of course, historically in reality, but it's just overwhelmingly presented in this way. And the religious, civilizational arguments which they actually made, both the Muslims and the Christians, the Europeans and the Turks, is completely devoid. Everything is pragmatic and cynical. Like I told you, that one particular character, Sile, who's sort of this like a profound atheist, okay, the sort that could never exist, and based on that time frame, because the ideas that he mentions have only become fashionable now and were completely unheard of back then. But yeah, thanks. James, typical Netflix behavior. You watch a show and you're three episodes in, and then two men start start kissing. Yeah. Oh man, I've been through this so many times where what my problem is watching things on TV, or Netflix or whatever you want to call it. Um, I always find myself watching old stuff, just stuff that I've watched a million times, and I hate it. But because it's like tried and true, and it's been vetted, and it's not stupid, and I oftentimes try to watch like exactly what you're saying, and it'll of course it'll be praised everywhere, which now I've learned is actually a warning sign not to watch it. But it'll be some whatever show, again, historical, sort of pre-modern, medieval stuff, and I'll watch it. And like you said, and then just like an episode or two or three into, and all of a sudden, two men are making out. It's kind of, here we go again. Yeah, there's obviously there's an agenda here again. Yeah, which is what I was saying. They want you to think this is normal. This is how it always was. Don't fight it. Why are you arguing? Your crazy ideals have no basis. This is how people have always behaved. Actually, no, you're a liar. They didn't behave like that. That's what you want people to think, so you can get away with your own particular agenda. So, good call. Karachian. Thanks for calling out the BS that they did to one of our heroes. Much love and respect from Hungary. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. Actually, I was a little surprised. So, one of the reasons I watched this is because it's a foreign language movie. It was made by Hungary, and I've actually watched a lot of foreign movies. I think there's some film company called Janos, like Janos. Maybe it's Janos, which comes out with a lot of sort of medieval movies dealing with Russians and Slavic peoples and Hungarians. And I like it actually. It's a lot better than what I've described. And this particular series, which is Hungarian, I thought it might be like that. That was one of the reasons I was open to watch it. I thought, okay, I'm sure it won't be perfect. It'll have a lot of problems, but this proved to be much more Hollywoodish than something actually made in Hungary, even though I guess it was. It's made by Hungarian producers, directors, actors. So it was kind of shocking to see that, because I know the Hungarians are quite proud of Mr. Hunyadi. Qualque. Does the Coptic Church also commemorate the presentation of the baby Jesus in the temple, like we do in the Roman Catholic every February the 2nd? I don't know. Look it up. That's a good question. I'm not quite that well versed in Coptic vis-a-vis Catholic theology and liturgies. Speedrunner. Thank you, RI, for suffering through this garbage so we won't have to. I have thrown my TV in the garbage if I had to see Vlad sucking blood. Yeah. Yeah, it's sad, like I said, you grow up with TV around you. It's like, especially my age and probably people older than me, definitely younger than me. Though younger, it would become different memes and modes like computers and phones. But like you're always bombarded with images and images and ideas and thoughts and concepts, and you're constantly thinking that, okay, this is a movie maker who wants to make money, so he's going to do or say whatever that's appealing. Sex sells, like I mentioned, right? But it's like you start realizing, first of all, sex doesn't sell, actually. I kind of feel I get cringish when I watch, like I said, even alone, just a movie. It's like watching porn, and I don't want to watch porn. So when, like, is it necessary for a plot? I won't understand the movie unless I see some guy and some woman like making out and humping, essentially. I won't get it. I'm going to miss some pivotal point. Older movies would sort of hint at it. Oh, the light dims and he comes close to her. Okay, yeah, I get it. Why the constant, pushing the sexuality constantly, and it's more obvious when you look at these historical movies, because it wasn't like that, and yet again you're pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. So I think that's what makes it really stand out. And it's no longer, oh, we're trying to show you what sells. No, we're actually trying to condition you. We're socially engineering you. That's the real game plan. All right. Speedrunner again. The other issue with shows having anachronistic sexuality, regardless of Christian morality, is the lack of condoms or consequence of infanticide. Yeah, that's a good point. Which is, by the way, it didn't happen. A woman back in those days, her entire identity, her virtue, what's that word again, was tied up with just her virginity, because a man didn't want to take sloppy seconds. Sorry. That's the way it was, and the way it still is, except most men don't even realize it because they're so desensitized themselves and don't even realize why they're so what's the word, unsatisfied. But that was the thing back then. So a woman, whatever her libido was, would not go around sleeping with any guy, just from a practical point of view. And yeah, like you say, the pregnancy and the condoms and all that, It was like it's like a death sentence for some woman to go sleep around. You're gonna get pregnant with some guy who's not your husband. You're gonna No man will ever want to marry you, and because you've lost your virginity, or worse, you got pregnant. I mean, these were literal consequences that could completely break a whole person, especially a woman. Um, so again, but what do they care? They're not out to capture reality. They just want you to think this is cool. This is how everyone acted. This is what every woman does. So you may emulate them. Coltrane, it's all important, Brother Raymond. Well, thanks. You probably were inspired to write that when I said something that maybe I said wasn't important. So you were affirming me. Thank you. Karachin, I think it's also to spread the distaste towards Christianity. I'm 25, and all my life I hated Christianity, thinking it's a cult and full of pedos and such. Only recently, by watching you, David Wood, and others, that I realized how wrong I was. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Here's the thing: have Christians done bad things? Sure, that's because they are ultimately human beings. But and I have no problem with movies showing that. Okay, like if you make a movie about a Catholic pedophilia ring, okay, well, I mean, I guess that's real, right? Do it. But when you actually go into history, and we have certain noble, honorable, hardcore people who died for their Christianity, and then you turn them again into that sort of thing, that's when you start realizing, well, why are you doing that? If you actually stuck to the script, meaning the actual primary sources, you'd have a better movie. More people would like it. More people would watch it. If they did nothing but just follow the script of John Hunyadi, let's say in my book, because it's based on the primary sources, you'd have an amazing movie. Okay, you don't have to make anything up. So, but why do they jettison it all out and rewrite it like what they did with Vlad, the Impaler, and his father, to demonize and make always the Christians look like the bad guys, even when they were the victims, even when they were the good guys, even when they were fighting for the good side, while the Muslims and the Ottomans were killing and raping and mutilating and impaling? It's at that point. This is why I say I noticed this more. I noticed this phenomenon more because I am acquainted with history. If it was just movies about the modern era, I would believe it, because that's modern people have been conditioned to think and act that way. But the people of, let's say, the 15th century that we're talking about, or before, they didn't have Hollywood to brainwash them. They didn't have pornography. They didn't have internet. Okay. So these were normal people. They were sane. They were commonsensical people, and they were religious, and they were pious. And we know that from the sources. So why does Hollywood have to go out of its way and make you think, nope, they weren't. They were scum, just like you. Not you, dear viewer, because I know you're better than that, but you know what I'm saying. Coltrane. We wouldn't be here if we thought your words hollow and inauthentic. Your following is well earned, and your knowledge is just what the doctor ordered for a sickly Christian population. Well, thanks, Coltrane. Again, you must have written that when I was again maybe expressing some cynicism in what I'm talking about. So thanks for that support. Coltrane. Christianity invites you to taste and judge the fruit by its goodness. Islam commands you to eat the fruit because it has already been declared good. Yeah, good point. Now, the question is, why does Hollywood side with Islam? Why isn't it objective? Why doesn't it just stay out of this argument? Why not just report the way it was? Why is it always, always unchangeably so that the Christians are the bad guys? They're the dishonorable ones. They're the ignoble ones. They're the hypocrites. They're the liars. Again, here's your assignment. If you're interested in this sort of thing, go and watch any kind of movie that deals with the medieval era. And I challenge you to keep an eye out and find the most distasteful character. More often than not, it's going to be the guy who wears this Christianity on his sleeve, meaning a priest or a monk or a bishop or a pope. That's going to be the absolute worst character. in the whole thing. And the hero is going to be sort of, wise to that sort of thing. And he's cynical and he doesn't trust religion. And, his Christianity is basically based on live and let live and tolerate. And that's, and that's the end of it. So I just find that rather interesting. Qualqui. I was taught by my folks to be a calabreo, a knight, chivalrous and respectful to the ladies, and firm in defending my honor as a virtuous man. Well, you were taught something rare and noble. Good for you. I guess that means just thank your parents or those who taught you. There was a time when every man was taught that, but not anymore because they don't want that. Lazy prodigy. All hail Christendom. I purchased all your literature. Please elaborate on muscular Christianity and the reason for it outside of the nations we reside in. I am grateful for you, U.S. Black Christian nationalist, Deus Vult. All right, my brother, I appreciate it. Thank you. Elaborate on muscular Christianity. Oh man, that was supposed to be the topic of my next book, and it might still be, but topics keep coming up. Some seem more urgent than other. But muscular Christianity, in a word, is just that. It was a non-apologetic, non-doormat. It was the antithesis of what I coined as doormat Christianity. And doormat Christianity is what basically permeates the Christian world today, especially the Christian West, which is basically a good Christian is a doormat, which means he doesn't judge, he turns the other cheek, he lets you basically wipe your feet on him because he's a doormat, and because that's what Jesus wanted, according to this theory. What most Christians don't realize is this entire theory, which has been decades in the making, is created by the enemies of Christianity. Because what better way to dominate and control Christians than by actually infiltrating their faith and teaching them, hey, your religion is to actually accept me the way I am and shut up and let me do whatever I want, or else you're an evil hypocrite. And it doesn't matter, or rather it doesn't help, that this is also the easy way. It's the easy way to turn the other cheek. It's the easy way to be a doormat. It's the easy way not to judge or to ever say anything, okay, or be confrontational. That's the easy way. That's the coward's way, okay? Well, Christianity is not for cowards. It never was. Christ was not a coward. Christ engaged in violence, all right? He made a whip and he whipped out bovine and animals and humans, okay? That was a show of violence. So there is a time and place for violence. He didn't, when a centurion came to him, a man who killed, who was in charge of, who had so much blood on his hand as a Roman centurion, Jesus, who always after healing someone, and he healed his servant, tells them to repent. He didn't say that to this Roman centurion. Rather, he praised him as a man of more faith than everyone in Israel. Go figure. Why didn't he have a problem? Why didn't Jesus yell at him and be like, I've healed your servant. Now repent. Get out of this army. You're killing people. That's the most evil thing. He didn't. Nor did John the Baptist. Jesus told people to buy a sword. That actually, not because he was being meaningless, because that's the modern day doormat interpretation. Jesus went out of his way to tell his disciples, sell your garment and buy a sword, because he was saying absolutely nothing. Okay, that's doormat, stupid Christianity. All right. Earlier Christians understood what I'm talking about. The real John Hunyadi, the real Vlad the Impaler. They understood all this, but that was muscular Christianity, to go back to your question. All right. But if you want a deeper dive, you can see that book that I told you about, Defenders of the West, or my newer one, Two Swords of Christ. All right. Because Christ, I just saw it. You see that icon? That's Jesus Christ with a sword. That's a real icon, by the way. That's, I think, is it Bulgarian? It's some sort of Orthodox Eastern Balkan icon that was gifted to me. And anyway, so there's definitely a long, long tradition about muscular Christianity, which is to say, at least a kind of faith that defends itself. All right. As Teddy Roosevelt said, a consummate historian himself, if it wasn't because Christians fought back, Christianity would have died a long, long time ago. Is that what Jesus wants? He wants you to keep turning the other cheek until you're extinct and you can't spread the gospel? I don't know. Call me old fashioned. Das Barba. Aside from the obvious, how do you think atheists like me can help fight this downward spiral of the West? So you're an atheist and you want to help the downward spiral. Well, that's admirable. Good. That's a good question. How can you help? Well, okay. Look, when it comes to the main question I often talk about, Islam, you can be an atheist and obviously reject Islam and stand against it. That's there's a lot of atheists that do that. So I don't think you're handicapped in that sense. I think the problem is though, and as I've been saying increasingly, Islam is really a symptom. Okay, so it's all well and good to combat a symptom and try to ameliorate it, but until you realize that there's deeper sources, and this is where you may come into conflict if you when to start to understand the deeper sources, the rot within Western civilization, which has led to something like Islam, which is weak, terrorizing the West. How did that happen? Well, it's not Islam itself. You have to understand this. What's happening. There was a time when Islam came with a sword, put it to people's throats, like what we were talking about, John Hunyadi, 15th century. And those people either capitulated or fought tooth and nail. Okay. That was a real thing. That is not what's happening today. Muslims have not changed in the sense that they still wield a sort of supremacist worldview, and whoever they're around, they're going to try to subjugate one way or the other. That's an Islamic imperative. It's arguably even sort of primordial human sort of way of seeing things, which I think is what fortifies it with the theological component. Okay, but what's happening today to Europe or the West, this isn't the same thing. Muslims, yeah, are acting that way, but they are being enabled and empowered by Western people. Okay. If it wasn't for that, all the problems that you're hearing would never even exist. That's why a country like where I'm at right now, temporarily, and I'm leaving very soon, uh, has no Muslim problems. Okay, because all it had to do is say, "Oh, no Islam, no Muslim migration," and that was the end of it. Okay, so or Poland, same thing. They don't have problems. So if you really want to be honest, the real problem is Western people are doing that. So back to your atheist question, why? Okay, so if you're an atheist, you need to help me. Why are those Western people being that way? Well, they would tell you because all religions are equal, and there's freedom of religion and multiculturalism, et cetera, et cetera. And this is where the argument becomes a little more abstract. And as an atheist, you may have more difficulty confronting it because these are arguments that are tailor made for atheists to acquiesce to. So I think on the one hand, you may understand this, the business of Islam being inherently whatever violent and intolerant, but you may, as an atheist, you may have more difficulty confronting your kin, the other atheists who are fundamentally empowering and enabling Islam in this sense. Or, for example, all the things that I've been talking about, the sexuality, the hypersexuality, the promotion of vice everywhere you look. If you're an atheist, a fellow atheist is going to tell you, "What are you talking about?" Well, why not? Freedom. Well, don't come to me with your morality. Who said? You're not right. This is freedom. This is what people are. So these will be, of course, default obstacles you will encounter as an atheist, I'm sure. So to your question. But thanks for asking. Hey, you guys are coming up with good ones today. Corporal Marcellus. Honor doesn't exist anymore! Exclamation mark. Nobody cares. It's forgotten. It's become absurd in this low, perverse age. The essence of the solution is to pursue truth with humility and only with the respect to God. Yeah, I think you agree with me, yeah? Corporal Marcellus? Yeah. Honor does not exist anymore. I remember as a little kid, I was very impressed with the concept of honor. And it was very much, connected to, let's say, chivalry and a knight. And even before then, the Romans had honor, of course. Um, and other peoples too. I froze because I don't want it to just seem like only the Romans. I know other peoples do, but I can't think of a particular reference at this time. So I'll leave it there. But anyway, honor is an innate thing that everyone understands, men and women. Men have a particular kind of honor to defend, and women have a particular honor to defend. And man, those words mean nothing anymore. Used to be that people lived and died for honor. Yeah, a man would die, a woman would die for her honor. Think about it. And now, not only does it not exist, but even where it did exist in the past, they want to convince you it never existed. They were just like us. So that's why it's very hard for me to believe that this is all just a coincidence. Lazy prodigy. To who goes the victory? Goes the legacy. Christendom must rise. Deus vult. Love to you and your family. Thanks, lazy prodigy. I appreciate that. And yeah, your words ring true to me. Uh, Vict Victarid, make warrior monks great again. Yeah, you talk warrior. Okay, this is a reference to my book, Two Swords of Christ, which is about the warrior monks, the knights of the hospital and the temple. And you talk about anachronisms. I want to see it. I mean, I don't even know. Are there movies about? I'm sure there are about the Templars and the Hospitallers, and I can only imagine just how utterly depraved those movies are. These were the guys, by the way, who just committed. So these were the ultimate, to us, anachronisms. These are the guys that we cannot even begin to get our heads around, which is why I wrote about them. So what do I mean? They were the antithesis of the doormat Christian. They were Christian, they were pious, they vowed themselves, they were monks. Think about a monk, but a warrior monk. So when there's nothing to defend, they are on their hands and knees praying and fasting. When there's someone coming to attack Christendom, they are the first ones out fighting. Okay. That's the warrior monks, the Knights of the Temple and the Hospital, who I wrote about in my book, Two Swords of Christ. And that is the exact total opposite. Talk about honor, talk about piety, talk about ferocity, talk about virtue, all there. And now what are they? Well, the Templars, as we all know, are just Freemasons who are out to conquer the world, right? Idiots. Um, Not surprising that that's how they're portrayed today after what I just discussed about Hunyadi, because anything good, noble, and honorable has to be degraded in keeping with our culture, lest you think there's something better to aspire to. Don't ever think that. They don't want you to think that. There's nothing for you but hedonism, gluttony, perversion, right? Schwambub. Is the new book out of stock? Waiting since 625. Yeah, the new book, Two Swords of Christ, which I just mentioned, it actually really sold out a lot. There was a huge demand, and there were several reprints since, but it should come to you eventually, hopefully. Yeah, but I mean, it's there. You might have to wait. There's been several reprints. Um, People are liking it, and that's great. I'm always humbled and happy to find that people are, I only write about these guys and these things because they matter to me. This is always a labor of love. I don't do it for success or money or anything like that. And I think that is why they're successful, because I'm doing something that I innately realize is needed and appealing to me, and it's appealing and needed to you too. And that's why I think people are hungry for this sort of thing, because I've been hungry for it. I write these books. I write the books that I wish I could have read, if that makes sense. The kind of books that I was hungry for. I had gleamings from primary sources, some decent secondary sources, but the reason I wrote them is because I felt like these stories needed to be uh, known and collated in a readable narrative. Uk. I'll just call you Uk. Uk Nexomi. That sounds like a pharaonic name almost. All right. What do you think about the Freedom Religion Act pertaining to Islam? I don't see how this can apply to them when the teachings of Islam directly oppose U.S. constitutional, federal, and state law. As it happens, my friend, I'm writing another article on just this topic. Oh, this is important, actually. Bear with me. A lot of people don't understand that. All right, let's go back a little bit. A lot of if you've been paying attention to the news, especially in Texas, I've noticed an interesting dichotomy. On the one hand, people still maintain, oh, Islam's another religion, freedom of religion. I'm not going to invade. Muslims can come and practice freely. On the other hand, there's this sort of awakening and anger and rejection of Sharia, right? Sharia law, Islamic law, to put it colloquially. And what's interesting about that to me is people don't understand you're talking about the same thing, okay? Islam and Sharia are two sides of one coin. If you want, Islam is the descriptive name of the religion, and Sharia is its prescriptive application. They're the same thing. If you are a pious, observant, or otherwise, pious or observant, practicing Muslim, you are by definition a Sharia adherent Muslim. The only Muslims that don't follow Sharia are nominal Muslims. You're just a culture. Your name just so happens to be Muhammad, but you've now secularized and you're just part of, mainstream Western society, which there's a lot of that, I'm sure. Okay. But if you actually acknowledge you're a Muslim and you embrace Islam, well, you're a Sharia compliant Muslim. So I find it interesting how on the one hand, there's this sort of vocal attack in Texas. Governor Greg Abbott, he's on multiple occasions, including Donald Trump, they've said things like Sharia law is not welcome here. But they'll say Islam and Muslims are welcome here. So it just, there's a sort of cognitive dissonance, I suppose, in those two things, because they're talking about the same thing. This is what's known as a sort of distinction without a difference fallacy. But it even gets worse. I mean, it's kind of good that this Sharia business is coming out in the open, because people can, because it's raising these kinds of questions that I'm discussing right now, and people are going to think about it. But if this kind of line of reasoning and thinking goes, it's going to become very obvious that there's a lot of other even deeper problems than the question of Sharia. For example, what you just asked about, the oath, let's say the oath of allegiance to the United States that all naturalized U.S. citizens must take, including Muslims. Check it out sometime. It's a very short paragraph. It's about if you become a U.S. naturalized U.S. citizen, you have to renounce all allegiance to any foreign entities and pledge your full allegiance to the United States, including defending it militarily, etc. Guess what? All of that is 100% counter to what Sharia teaches. That is to say, to what Islam teaches. Far from being loyal to non-Muslims, okay, Muslims are required to hate non-Muslims and never show any loyalty to them, except as a pretense, as a way to feign friendship in order to get whatever they want to get, whether it's citizenship or citizenship in order to help bring the United States to Islamic rule. That's purely Islamic. Look up Quran 328, Surah 3, Ayah 28. It says, to paraphrase, Muslims do not be friends, non-Muslim do not be friends or be loyal to non-Muslims, except as a way of guarding yourself, which all the Muslim clerics for centuries have interpreted to mean, oh, if you find yourself in a position where they have power over you, then you can be friends to them. You can say whatever you want. You can take an oath. You can pledge allegiance. You can curse Muhammad and renounce him. That is all Islamic. As long as your heart is still true to Islam and your ultimate loyalty is to Islam, and when and when and if you can help Islam overcome the infidel entity that you just pledged allegiance to, you should. Okay, that's actually 100% Islamic. So I've always found it interesting, how most Americans, they're finally getting the idea about Sharia, but it still seems like some weird, secondary kind of accretion added to Islam that only radicals engage in, not your average Muslim. No, Sharia is normative Islam. And Sharia maintains that Muslims are only to be loyal to the Ummah, the supranational Islamic entity that transcends all national boundaries, languages, ethnicities, races, and all that. That's their ultimate loyalty. It's in the Quran. So, you can see now why we are where we are. It's not because we don't have John Hunyadis, which we don't. It's because we're idiots. And things don't matter. You say, oh, if you want to be a U.S. citizen, you have to pledge this allegiance, without realizing that this person adheres to a religion that makes it impossible for them to pledge this allegiance. But hey, freedom of religion, right? Whatever that means. Let me elaborate. I know what freedom of religion means, and it's a good thing. But when there's a religion that it's not just about worship now, it's about political allegiance, and Islam is. Okay. Now we've gone into deep waters that most people are completely unaware of. Das Barba, thank you for your answer, Mr. Ibrahim. By the way, your book just arrived. Love from Italy. Oh, great. Thank you. I'm glad you got the book. I hope you like it. Hope to hear about how you liked it. Nick Webb, the left attacks Christian nationalists and never defines it. But Islam has no separation of church and state, but there are always the victims somehow. Weird how that works. Funny I'm glad you mentioned Christian nationalism. I actually wrote an article about that this week that was published. And, my point in the article is very interesting. It has to do with anti-Semitism, so lend me your ear. Long story short, in Hungary, anti-Semitism is at an all-time low compared to most of Europe. So actually, Jews are pretty safe in Hungary, especially in Budapest, the capital. Now, what's interesting about that is Hungary is also an immensely Christian nationalist nation, probably the most in all of Europe, maybe arguably with Poland. Maybe there's some argumentation there. I don't know. But at least it's the number one, maybe number two in all of Europe. Now, why I find that intriguing is because you always hear Christian nationalism is some sort of precursor to anti-Semitism, right? That's one of the dangers of Christian nationalism, especially if it's white, okay? Jews are going to suffer. So it's kind of interesting. Hungary, which is a white European nation, and one of the most Christian nationalist ones in the world. And it just turns out that the Jews are actually safer here than almost anywhere else in Europe. So what does one make of that? And then at the same time, here's what's interesting. If you look at where anti-Semitism has seen a massive spike, it happens to be in 3 countries which are far from being associated with Christian nationalism. And they are, the United Kingdom, Germany, and France. Those countries are not Christian nationalists. What they're renowned for is secular liberalism. Okay. So, should we now blame secular liberalism for the rise of anti Semitism? That's if we were being simplistic idiots, like the ones who claim Christian nationalism is responsible for the rise of anti Semitism. If you're being simplistic, actually, there's other factors in the background that we have to look at. It's not because secular liberalism promotes anti Semitism, it's because secular liberalism promotes something else that's potentially anti-Jewish, which is Islam. So if you look at those three countries where there's been a spike, Germany, the UK, and France, guess what? They're also the three countries with the largest Muslim populations in Europe, which is saying something because all of Europe has a lot of Muslims. So isn't that interesting? And to put the cherry on the top and really make my point, I also read in another report, I think by the Observatory of Islamophobia. It's a European organization and website which follows the pattern and trail of attacks on Christianity around the world, but especially in Europe. So, according to it, the worst. This is one of the highest records of attacks on Christians in Europe. Guess which three countries had the highest? The UK, Germany, and France. And what did the report identify as the number one culprit behind attacks on Christians or Christianophobia? It called it radical Islamist ideology. So isn't that interesting? Okay. So it's not actually Christian nationalism that is a boogeyman and attacks Jews. It's actually the one that protects them. And it's secular liberalism, not because it's innately bad, but because it gives rise to Islamist ideology, that Christians and Jews are being attacked in Europe. So I thought that was an interesting revelation recently. Robert Johnson. I just started reading my signed copy of Crucified Again. Your works inspired me to read the Quran, Hadith, Sharia law, and now the Talmud. Now I can defend Christendom with facts on my side. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Glad you got the signed book. I enjoy signing these books, and they're all books that I mentioned. I'm just thinking Crucified Again is one of my older books that's hard to find and out of print. So I'm glad you got it. And thanks for the note. Lies destroy lives. We in the West are weak. The punishment for crimes committed against someone because you don't like their views about politics or religion must be tougher if we are going to survive. Well, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to, we're so like embedded in our society. This is one of the problems. All right. You're so part of something that you become desensitized. And, you have to, if you can disentangle yourself from it and rise above it and look at it objectively, you'll realize just how insane the world we're living in right now is. But when it's all you see and all you hear and you're bombarded with this sort of news, and it's taken for granted that, yeah, your society is always kowtowing to anyone else and, giving up land and giving up everything and bringing in people who kill them and just saying, oh, yeah, but it's whatever. It's multiculturalism. If you're born into that, you just get used to it. But if you can, like I can, just kind of rise above it and look at it from a bird's eye view and you'll realize like, this is sick. Okay. And by the way, one of the ways really, if you ever really want to know just how utterly sick Western society is vis-a-vis non-Westerners, all you have to do is, as they say, put the shoe on the other foot, which is look at whatever it is that the West is doing and then transpose it on another people and see how that would look. Okay. And then it will become obvious to you. It won't be obvious to you if it's only Western people, because like I said, you're desensitized. You grew up on seeing Western people kissing butt to everyone. and having no honor, having no virtue, having no dignity. That's all you will ever see. So you're used to it. But now imagine some of the things that Western people do that everyone takes for granted, and try to imagine another people doing that. Okay. Let's say, I don't know, think of any country you want, non-Western, non-European, not America, Canada, Australia. And, just imagine, let's say, any country, some African country, um, some Arab or Muslim country. Imagine telling those people, hey, you can't practice your religion in public because we have a 5% Christian minority, and that might hurt their feelings. I can't help but laugh just thinking about it. Just imagine the reaction, okay? And even your reaction. In other words, it's one thing to say, oh, those indigenous people would not have it, but even you and I would not expect them to have it. We expect that they would reject that. That's a normal thing. But you also, at the same time, don't expect Western people to reject it. Somehow they have to always accept it, right? Kind of weird how that works. The smallest minority around the world, Western people, that is to say, white people. Okay, I don't know. You can look up the numbers. They're anywhere from 5 to like 8% of the world. That's the one group that has to give up land, give up territory, give up its culture, suppress its heritage, suppress its religious expression, so others feel comfortable. But you can never, ever even think about doing that in other people's countries. Why is that? I find that very interesting. I'd like it if someone would correct me and show me why. Maybe there's something I missed. Am I missing something here? Or what? Thoughts on Bosnian Muslims? They generally act different. Yeah, because I think they're not Muslims. Their Islam is skin deep. They're nominal Muslims. I mean, there's a lot of that actually. It's not just in Bosnia, but Islam is what Islam is, and if you call like I said earlier, your name can be Muhammad. You can be born into a Muslim family, but none of this applies to you because you're an atheist, you're a secularist, you became a Christian, you became a Buddhist. I don't know. So just being something doesn't mean you are it. Okay. And my understanding probably is most Bosnians are just overly European, which means they don't care about religion. So just like most Europeans don't care about Christianity, most Europeans don't care about Islam. And so that I guess that would be the answer to the Bosnian conundrum. All right. I think that's the end of that. Wow, I've gone on for a while. Well, thank you for joining me. This has been a longer one. I hope you found this presentation edifying, especially about the John Hunyadi, the history, and why it is that they always have to lie and distort and pervert it. Always turning actual Christian heroes who defended and died for their faith into just just regular kind of womanizing, gallivanting, atheistic characters who are just not in any way, shape, or form appealing. Well, I hope I've given you some food for thought. Until next time, take care and bye.